Please welcome the panel on Sink or Swim, Corporate Strategies for Water Resilience, moderated by Senior Correspondent at Time, Justin Warland.
Good morning, everyone. We are here to talk about water. Obviously, anyone who follows water issues will know this is a very challenging time. There's increased human usage of water and increasing climate stress, drought, other things that are making it more difficult to source water. So we're going to talk a little bit about those challenges, but also have a focus on some of the solutions here from the folks on stage. And we've got three great panelists from different sectors, starting here with Pilar Cruz, who's Executive Vice President and Chief Sustainability Officer at Cargill, Melissa Fifield, who is Managing Director and Head of BMO's Climate Institute, and then Kara Hurst, who's Chief Sustainability Officer at Amazon. And so we're going to have a lot of sort of cross-cutting discussions with this group. So Melissa, I want to start with you. BMO Climate Institute has done some research on the financial impact for firms of water stress and water scarcity. And so I thought maybe we would just start with you to give an overview of what you've learned from the research, sort of cross-cutting broadly.
Sure. Thanks, Justin, and thanks for the opportunity to be here. Maybe a little bit about BMO here in LA. Maybe you've all seen BMO Stadium, but just a bit of context. We're the 8th largest bank in North America by assets. I lead the Climate Institute, where we are really connecting the dots across the organization in terms of climate knowledge, coordinating action, and really trying to help our clients and be their lead partner in the transition to net zero. So the work that we did with UC Berkeley, we did some work with students at the Haas School of Business looking at the financial impacts of certain climate hazards on crop yields across the US. So we looked at a business as usual scenario, we looked at a moderate emissions scenario, and we looked at three key climate hazards. We looked at drought, wildfire, and extreme heat. And what we found was pretty significant. So by 2050, US agriculture losses from drought are estimated to be about $11 billion a year, primarily impacting, no surprise, significant agriculture states, including California, with a primary impact on fruit growing operations, about $460 million in losses by 2050. In Texas, primarily impacting livestock, about $890 million by 2050. And then grain growing states, North Dakota and Illinois, about $650 to $700 million annually in terms of the impact. And that's just drought. So extreme heat and wildfire also impact those crops significantly as well. But it was quite interesting to see in real numbers what these risks look like tangibly in monetary form.
Well, that sets the ground well for Pilar. Of course, Cargill agriculture is responsible for 70% of freshwater usage globally. We heard the numbers from Melissa. Maybe you could just give some texture about how you see the risks for Cargill.
Yeah. So first of all, thank you so much for the opportunity to participate in this event. Really excited to be here. And I want to provide a little bit of the context for those who are not very familiar with Cargill. We are a food and agriculture company that operates globally. We have about 160,000 employees. And the best way to describe our company is every time you have something to eat, whether it's breakfast, lunch, or dinner, there will likely be a Cargill ingredient or a product, from eggs to beef to poultry to oils, chocolate, and salt. So you can imagine the impact and the implications of water for our company. And this is why we are fully committed to putting water at the core of everything we do in our company. We have seen extreme weather events, we have seen droughts, we have seen how hard it is for farmers to get access to water. And for us, if there isn't water, we are not able to produce food. That's simple. Water begins, or harvest begins with water, every farmer needs water to be able to produce their commodities. And we think about water the following way. It is essential for us to grow crops, to raise cattle, to clean and sanitize our production facilities, as well as move and store food. While we have seen a lot of challenges, I can tell you that we are excited about the progress we have made. In 2024 alone, we were able to help restore 38 billion liters of water, which is the equivalent to producing food for 7 million people per year, and that's a lot. So we have seen challenges, but we are excited, thanks to the investments we have made, the technology we have explored, and the partnerships that we have.
That's great. So we'll pull on a number of threads from what you just said, but I want to go to Kara first and just AWS committed to be water positive by 2030. What does that mean? And then maybe more broadly, you can just give some texture about what water means to Amazon. Of course, there's a lot of conversation around data centers and water usage, but how do you think about water usage at Amazon?
Yeah, so first, just to back it up, I think I'm getting a beat here.
Yeah.
That's nice. Just to back it up a little bit, and Pilar, those are amazing, statistics you just shared, and congratulations on all that progress. But I think one is exciting to see water and water resilience on the agenda at a place like Milken. I mean, that is amazing. For sustainability, I think water has been rising in importance for our conversation in the field of sustainability and then in the field of corporate sustainability in general, and that's great to see. We've been talking about carbon for a long time and energy needs, and now we're talking about things like water and biodiversity and investments in nature. And so we are investing a lot in these issues and thinking about how they relate not only to our corporate strategy and our investments, but really to the health of the communities where we operate around the world. So that means what water has for the importance of our business, as you both described, what it means for how we operate for our businesses, our data centers. Amazon Web Services, or AWS, is a water-intensive business. And the reason for that is that data centers take water to cool as they operate around the world. But we also want to invest in water. I mean, we have communities around the world that are operating with water scarcity, and that means, where our employees live, where we operate. We want to make sure that all of our communities are operating in healthy ways. So when we think about it, we are thinking about it in the ways that we invest. These issues are interconnected. Climate change is bringing drought. We're seeing heat indices obviously rise around the world. All of these things are very connected. So we have made some goals. As Justin mentioned, we have committed to being water positive by 2030 for our Amazon Web Services business, which is our data center cloud computing business, which is a very ambitious goal where we're going to return more water to the communities where we operate those data centers around the world by 2030. And we've also looked at this from really a water intensity or water scarcity perspective. And we've said, in places like India, where they're facing more intense water scarcity issues, probably going to go faster. And so for a place like India, we want to return more water for our global operations to those communities where we operate by 2027. So we're looking at this from water's a very local issue. So where we have operations in places where we're water scarce, we're going to go a little bit faster. And we look at this from, again, first looking at how we can reduce our water usage, how we can be more efficient, and then how we can contribute back to the replenishment.
Well, that's great. I want to pick up on that point about water being a local issue. And of course, water is in the supply chain, the value chain of so many, basically every company in some way, shape, or form. But it's something that you might not have so much direct control on. It's so local. And so I want to just get a sense of how you think about tackling the local element of that. How do you work with people on the ground? How do you work with farmers? Maybe we'll start with you, Pilar. And then, love to get perspective from across the panel on that value chain challenge.
So we think about the impact that we can have related to water in three different aspects. I think similar to Amazon, we think about our own operations, we think about our supply chain, and we think about the communities where we operate. We also have an ambitious goal to achieve or enable water positive across our operations and supply chain by 2030, similar to what Kara just mentioned now. And we take a highly, I would say, localized approach. To your point, the issues that India is dealing with are very different than in Brazil, than in Mexico, than in the Mississippi River. So we use data to understand what are some of the challenges and prioritize, both from an operations and supply chain, the areas that we can have most impact. From an operations perspective, 10% of the water we use is within our plants. And we have prioritized 68 plants, which are the equivalent to 80% of the water we use in our facilities. We have implemented continuous improvement practices using a lot of monitoring systems, KPIs, best practices, state-of-the-art investments, and we have seen a significant reduction in the use of water within our plants. Just an example, I was mentioning this to you before. We visited Brazil last week. One of our plants, using a simple continuous improvement methodology, identified simple ways to reduce water by 30% year on year. That's one example. Within our supply chain, again, it would be 90% of the water that we use. And we take a very directive, I would say, collaborative approach with our farmers. I mentioned the ambition that we had within our company, which is, again, achieving water positive or enabling water positive within our supply chains. And I can tell you that it's not easy. While we have made significant improvements, we still believe we can do more. Just a couple of examples. For us, the 38 billion liters of water that we achieved or enabled last year were through regenerative agricultural practices. So we partnered with farmers in Brazil, in Australia, in Europe, in North America, to determine opportunities for them to improve the quality of the soil. We know regenerative ag not only allows the soil to be more resilient, but also for farmers to reduce the use of chemicals, fertilizers, and as a result of that, water conservation is one of the main benefits. We have farmers who have seen significant improvements, and we are proud of that. That's not enough. We are partnering with technology companies, with an Australian company called Goana, who has helped us develop a precision irrigation system that allows farmers to determine when and how they should irrigate the fields, which is fantastic. So again, it takes partnerships, technology, investment, and focus for us to prioritize where and how to have the impact.
I want to hear from the rest of the panel, but I just want to ask one follow-up, which is what are those engagements like with farmers? I mean, can you give a little bit of texture? I know you mentioned you were just in Brazil. You are on the ground having these conversations. Are they apprehensive? Are they excited? How do you make the case to them?
I think farmers are dealing with so much, from extreme weather events, climate change, water scarcity, lack of access to financial support, that they are open and receptive. But we have learned a lot over the years. I think rather than dictating what they need, we listen, we learn, and we co-create solutions for farmers. So I would say they are very open. And you and I talked about this earlier today. We have to pilot technologies. We have to pilot solutions and learn from those. We have seen, again, regenerative ag being a great example of the impact we can have, but we have seen some other examples where it doesn't. So I would say for the most part, they are receptive, they are willing to try, they trust our company, and they trust that together we can make a difference.
That's great. So, Melissa, I mean, I might ask this question broadly. So, how do you see firms engaging their supply chains on water issues?
Yeah, I just want to double click on something that Pilar said as well that I think is so important, which is the intersection between water and energy. Mm-hmm. Because I think measurement is so important to be able to actually have the metrics to track your progress and to meet the targets that you've set. But sometimes water is sort of inherently difficult to measure, so sometimes energy can be a proxy for that. And I think what you also beautifully outlined was the interplay of all of the benefits that can come when you're managing water well, the biodiversity, the soil health impacts, et cetera. And so I think that that's a really important dimension. And I think when you can sort of manage one or two of those major proxy things, there's a whole host of exponential impacts that you can have. I would say what we're seeing in terms of engagement with the supply chain is there's sort of three key elements of success, I would say. The first is identifying, like actually knowing where your suppliers are, which can be notoriously difficult depending on the country that you're speaking about. And I can speak from experience in the apparel industry. It's very difficult to know that full supply chain. So I guess first and foremost is understand where your products and raw materials are coming from, be able to map them, and understand from a water perspective where those watersheds are located, what the status of those watersheds are. We know that more than 50% of cotton, not a food crop, but a fiber crop, is grown in areas that are experiencing severe water stress. So that's a significant impact. So identifying, knowing where it's all coming from, and being able to map what those impacts and hazards are, super important. I would also say partnership. Not only partnership with, I'm going to get back to the metrics piece, but partnership with your CFOs. I think being able to quantify the risk associated and the impacts of those stresses on the business. It's a material impact to a lot of companies. I would say that there's probably a lot of companies also that haven't quite wrapped their arms around what those risks are and how perhaps precarious it actually is. So partnering with CFOs, partnering from a disclosure and measurement management perspective, I think is super important. And then partnership with your supply chain. You're identifying who they are, but going to them and figuring out how you can partner to figure out what resilience looks like. We've already talked about how water is quite local. It's difficult for large multinational companies to come in and say, a one-size-fits-all approach to what good water management looks like. So partnering on the ground with suppliers, I think, is a critical element. And then I think finally it's diversifying. Obviously, you don't want all of your eggs in one basket, so to speak. Understanding where all those suppliers are, but then understanding where else those capabilities exist and having sort of a plan in place. And I think that's not just for water management. I think that's for a lot of just best practice in terms of supply chain management that has benefits for water as well.
So I want to follow up with one question. Kara said in the beginning, I think very rightly, that it's great this conversation is happening at Milken. These things don't necessarily always make it onto certain stages, I guess. I guess I'm curious whether, in all the companies that you work with and you have exposure to, do you see the water issue getting attention in these ways? I mean, you said it's a material risk. Like, do you think that most firms understand the degree of material risk here? But then more broadly, do you see them grappling with this?
Yeah, I would say, a lot of BMO's clients in the commercial bank are in the ag sector, so they get it. Farmers understand inherently, and farmers are some of the best sustainability advocates there are because they understand how the nuance and the very minor weather variations and temperature variations can impact their crop yield. So I think, of course, they get it. So I don't think that's necessarily an issue. I think in other areas... What
about up the supply chain? What about the retailers that are buying from them?
I think increasingly, yes.
Yeah.
You're hearing from Amazon how much of a focus it is for them, and I think other industries are sort of waking up to it. But I don't, I think there's still a ways to go in terms of quantifying the urgency and the how big of a risk that it actually is.
Right. So Kara, I want to come to you. I mean, we've talked previously about the really interesting work that you're doing, engaging suppliers on emissions reductions, Amazon Scope 3 emissions reductions. I'm curious whether you have a similar approach for water. Are you working with suppliers and engaging them on these questions? And how do you leverage the Amazon scale to help push these conversations?
Yeah, that's really one of the most exciting things about being at a company of our size and scale is that we do feel a responsibility to use that size and scale for good. We've talked about this in light of some of the work, again, that we're doing in the space around carbon and decarbonization. We've done this with electrification of our fleet. We've done this with buildings. And so when we think about that, we have our commitment to being net zero carbon by 2040 under the climate pledge. We've taken that same kind of approach with the spaces in our nature-based investments, with biodiversity, and everything that we learn, we try and say, this only works when we share this and we partner within industry and we collaborate. So you both have referenced a number of different partnerships you have, I think, both with other industry partners, with good nonprofits, NGOs, certainly public-private partnerships with governments and utilities are very important in this space. We can talk about that. But within our value chains or our supply chains, one of the things that we've established is something called the Amazon Sustainability Exchange. And this is a public website, so you can just go on there. Any one of you can go on. And what we've tried to do is to make a space where things that are playbooks that we've developed that are things we've invested in. So we actually had, for example, a buildings playbook that we had spent many years of a lot of our building engineers had invested in and said, this is all of our best thinking and good information about how we are decarbonizing in the building space. And we had a conversation internally. This was proprietary information. And we sort of thought, well, why is that proprietary? What can it be shared, and can we put that out there for everybody to learn about how we're decarbonizing buildings? And we made it open source. And so we've now shared a water programs playbook. And so I think that, and that's something anybody can go on and access. You don't have to be a supplier of ours, but we're certainly advocating for anyone we partner with to go on and look at those best practices and open source those playbooks. And then other companies, we have over 550 companies that have signed on to the Climate Pledge with us. So other companies that have these best practices, or in general, we'd love to know, what both of you are doing. And if you have things you want to share, whether it's tools that you're using or well-vetted science-based resources, we have things like carbon calculators on there. Whatever it is, the tools that you're using to do these calculations to inform, we open source we have a white paper on a methodology. So how does Amazon calculate our, metrics around this? We published, for example, a water usage efficiency metric, right? So that for us is 0.18 liters of water per kilowatt hour. That's what we do for our data center work. We're leading in that, which we're very proud of. It's very efficient water usage metric. We're 28% better than we were in 2021. So we're a data-driven company. That will be a surprise to no one. And we try to put a lot of things out there around how we calculate our methodologies, what we're doing year on year, what our efficiency looks like. But more than that, how are we doing this? How do you unpack that, and what's the playbook behind that? And so the Amazon Sustainability Exchange is about doing that in a number of different domains around sustainability, but now including water. And that's one way that we're trying to get that information out there and to partner. One other thing that I'd mention, just because we've talked about technologies, is alongside that, we have a Climate Pledge Fund, which is a $2 billion venture fund. My team sort of co-runs with our Corp Dev program, and we make investments in early stage decarbonizing technologies, particularly that we think will help us as a company decarbonize. And so we have done a lot of these, that benefit, and then we share what we learn because we're utilizing them within Amazon. So they've been everything from, electric aviation to building materials. But we have one here in California, a company called Hippo Harvest. I got the chance to go visit them. And, it's a AI-powered robots growing lettuces. With, I think it's like 98% less water and, fewer chemicals and fertilizers. And they are now supplying to us via our Whole Foods Fresh kind of stores. And, so it becomes a technology we invest in, and we've done a number of things with them, and then supplying to us. And so that's a great partnership where we're looking, through that sort of early stage technology investment and all the way to becoming a supplier to us at Amazon. So I think whether it's technology investment or whether it's open sourcing data and information or, providing any kind of information that we have as quickly as we can about what we're learning and seeing within Amazon. Those are some of the ways that we're trying to encourage learning to happen quickly within this space.
I want to come back to the investment point in a minute and some of the finance questions here, but I do want to just pause and obviously for a lot of people, data centers, water usage for data centers will be on their mind. It's good to keep in perspective, as we said in the beginning, 70% of water usage is for agriculture. Data centers are not the primary driver of increased water usage right now, but that's significant. So I'd be curious, just very high level, how are you thinking about that challenge? And how is it affecting, the siting of data centers? I mean, it's not just a question of being sustainable with water usage. It actually directly affects, operational decisions. So how are you thinking about those things?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think, as we put up data centers around the world, there are so many considerations that go into that. I mean, think first and foremost, we think about latency issues and where those are and where our customers are and, where we need to build. And then there's things like seismic and safety issues. And there are, there's a number of obviously different factors that go into where we build. But increasingly, water scarcity is certainly an issue, and it's on the radar of our teams discussing that. And when we think about building in water-scarce regions, we know that when we're in Bahrain or we're in South Africa or we're in Arizona, we are going to build a data center that does not take water to cool, for example. So we're going to build differently. I live in Seattle, the Pacific Northwest. Not so much an issue. We have a lot of water up there. So, like we talked about before, water is very regional. Mm-hmm. So we're going to build differently, and we have building standards, and we actually have a building. This is why this is all connected. We have a building standards playbook, and we have ways that we're going to think about how this works in different areas. But this is a very active conversation internally about what the building standards are going to look like, and the materials are going to look like, and the cooling is going to look like. And we're very much in conversation with the community when we go in about what their needs are. And I think that's one of the key points here is you have to be in partnership with people on the ground and listening to those folks. They know best. The people on the ground know what their needs are. They know what their issues are. And they know kind of, what their community is going to want. And so listening first and finding both the right partners on the ground to tell you what those issues are and what you can expect, I think is very, very critical. So we work with our public policy teams and our community engagement teams, and we find the right partners. So those kinds of relationships, when we think about building and siting, are critical first and foremost. And then thinking about how we're going to build to incorporate that, whether it's in a water scarce region or not, when we go in and we site, whether it's a fulfillment center or a data center, I think is really, really important.
Great. And I think the opportunity for co-benefits is, for the community is definitely something to highlight and to underscore. So I want to turn to the finance question, of course, this being Milken, and Melissa, turn to you. You represent the BMO Climate Institute. You're not, necessarily doing deals, but you obviously bring a finance lens to this. And so I'm curious, what opportunities do you see for, the financial sector to actually finance some of the water work that needs to be done that we've been talking about? We'll start there, and I'll also pull in an audience question. Specific about farmers. How do farmers help get access to finance to do this? But let's start big picture, and then maybe we can drill down into the farmer question and bring in Pilar as well.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So I guess a couple of the primary ways that a bank can help sort of accelerate or advance some of these solutions is, for example, in our commercial bank, sustainability-linked loans, where you have loan terms that are connected to specific indicators related to greenhouse gas emissions reduction or water resilience, et cetera. So that's sort of a more specific mechanism that we do. I would also say, maybe to Kara's point about buildings represent pretty significant greenhouse gas emissions. They obviously also use a lot of water. So we have a building retrofits program that'll help to finance retrofitting existing buildings to be more water efficient, more energy efficient, and have human health benefits as well, improving the indoor air quality, et cetera. So that's another program that we do. And then in terms of BMO specifically, we also have a part of our business called Radical, which is focused on carbon credit development and trading, also advisory services to larger size corporates in terms of sort of helping make investments in carbon credit development. So that's another dimension of how we are sort of in the mix and how we can help.
So Pilar, for farmers, obviously farmers have tight margins. It's a tough business. So do you help? Does Cargill help with the finance? Tell us more about that.
Yeah, we do that both from a business perspective, but I would say also our investments in the community. And I want to start with the community. I grew up in Colombia, and I certainly have seen communities in need, whether it is in Colombia, in Central America, in India. We all know that women in certain places where there's water scarcity have to walk an hour and a half every day to get access to clean water. So we know that has to change. We have a partnership with water.org, which provides low-cost loans for people in Indonesia and the Philippines. And through those investments, through those partnerships, and through those low-cost loans, those communities have been able to get access and save that hour and a half for something more productive than just walking to get some clean water. So far, we have been able to improve the lives of 300,000 people through our partnership with water.org in Indonesia and the Philippines. So that would be the community aspect. From a business perspective, of course, we prioritize communities in need as well. One of the great examples that we have is in Mexico, where we partnered with a technology company on precision irrigation. Again, what it does is that it gives, through satellite data, it gives farmers the opportunity to know when and how they should be irrigating their fields. That allows for water reduction, again, improvements in the soil, more resilience in the soil, productivity and yield increases, which is what we all need. But some of them didn't have access to funding and financial support to be able to implement that technology. So we partner with our farmers and that technology company to make these loans available for the farmers. And then we have a nice, I would say, three-part partnership between this technology company, our corn farmers in Mexico, and Cargill, in a way that we are facilitating access to funding, also being able to buy the corn from these farmers, and ultimately see the environmental benefits that we have seen. So it is possible. It is not easy, but we've done it in places where farmers don't have access to financial support.
Well, it is interesting, the intersection of the sort of fintech revolution, which probably opens up new avenues for finance and for farmers who are, small farmers who are distributed across large areas and you don't necessarily have direct relationships with, which makes, sort of as a good segue to this bigger question of the role of technology, which has come up a little bit, but I might just pose it broadly to the panel and ask, to what degree are technology fixes able to address a lot of these issues? And maybe Kara, we'll start with you on I asked about data centers and AI and the water usage, but how can AI perhaps help alleviate some of these challenges?
Sure. Can I make one point before we go into AI? Because I just want to build on this. I have the honor of serving on the water.org board, so I just want to pick up on Pilar's point because I'm so proud of the work that they're doing and we are doing on that board and in that organization. It continues to grow, and I can't let it go because I think the work that happens, just to double down on that community point, it is technology, but sometimes it's also, we haven't really talked about the connection between water and sanitation and what happens in those communities. And so there is the focus on AI, and I'm excited to talk about that and all the things that we're doing there. But it's also sometimes the very simple things of bringing water, health, and sanitation to communities. And your point about women and girls and what that does to a whole community, and the simple investments that microfinance can make into that community. So one of the things that we did at Amazon is we put $10 million we were the first investor in a water and climate fund and that's going to reach up to 100 million people. And I've had, just the incredible honor of being invited into homes into India, and I was in Jakarta last year, and traveling into communities where, there are women building entrepreneurial businesses, but yet they have no toilet. So I went into a one-woman's home where she has a thriving TikTok business where she is selling goods on TikTok, and yet she had just, put in her own toilet. And she was spending, and these are issues because, her and her family, she's walking to get water, and it's a safety issue for her. It's a safety issue for her girls. And putting in, a toilet and putting in this into her home solves so many issues for that family. It solves health issues. It solves safety issues. She's then able to focus more on her own business. And you see wealth being built. You see health issues being solved. You see communities rising up. And so I just want to make the point that I think water it's not only something that is around, what we perceive it as, which is for our businesses a critical issue, but for some of these communities, it can just really absolutely change people's lives. And it's so fundamental that I think some of what we have in our ability as corporations to go in and invest in these issues and lift these communities up. There are solutions on the ground through very small amounts of money that can make a just tremendous, tremendous difference. And organizations like water.org and others that we've partnered with are doing this work on the ground and enabling this kind of microfinance model to get the money to people who know what they need best. And that's happening in some incredible ways around the world. So I just want to make that point.
It's very, very well said.
But on the AI point, lots of exciting things happening with AI. We are doing a number of things. We're so excited about, all the potential there that can bring. I've already mentioned the AI robots that I saw at Hippo Harvest, but we also partnered in Brazil with a company called Climo, and it's near Sao Paulo, and they are doing some work on, trying to figure out, again, back to when to irrigate and, what's the kind of monitoring situation that can happen for farmers. There's a lot of technology, I think, that's happening in the fields on kind of regenerative ag. There's a lot of kind of IoT that's happening for farmers, when you think about monitoring water usage and when to use water. So I think there's a lot of technology that can give farmers tech solutions about when to use water, how to use water, and that can help to really kind of both push down the cost of water in certain communities and also really think about, when we deploy these AI solutions, are we using them in an energy efficient way? So there's exciting things. You made the point also about the connection between buildings and kind of building efficiency in water. I would also make the point we've invested heavily in renewable energy. We have a portfolio of over 500 renewable energy projects around the world, and that has a strong connection to water because renewable energy projects are less water intensive than other carbon intensive energy sources. So all of this is very, very connected.
It's great. So. Sorry, I was distracted by the water.
I saw that.
There was water coming into our space, so I was just slightly distracted for a minute. Okay, so we heard about Internet of Things for farmers, technologies in the field, fintech. Are there other technologies that either of you would want to add to the list of things?
Maybe I would just say transparency and traceability of the supply chain is critically important for Cargill. Consumers today are asking, where is my food coming from? I want to understand the footprint, the climate footprint, low emissions, human rights. There's a lot of information that we are gathering through transparency and traceability, particularly for the key challenging supply chains where we operate today. So think about soy, corn, beef, cocoa in places like West Africa, in Latin America, in Southeast Asia. So we are making a significant investment in transparency and traceability, especially in places where communities don't have access to the resources like we do in many places in the US. So providing farmers with access to a cell phone and Wi-Fi and barcodes and really investing in training, raising awareness, and facilitating best practices so farmers can track access to the data for the crops they produce, but also on the water side. So what is the use of water? How can we help them reduce water through predictability and understanding weather patterns? Because I think it is key. Everybody knows that we have apps to see what the weather is going to be like tomorrow. Many farmers don't, and many farmers don't know how to use it. So we invest a lot in sustainable practices, in training, in education, and also providing minimum basic resources such as, again, access to Wi-Fi, a cell phone, or a barcode system to allow farmers to track and to reduce water consumption, but also inputs needed at the farm.
Great.
If I could just build on what both Pilar and Kara have said, I spent a lot of time in my career in the apparel industry and saw this firsthand, visiting women's homes that had recently gotten a toilet and how impactful that was on their lives. But I think the connection to the technology issues is so important because more people in the world have a cell phone than have a toilet. And like we take that for granted, and we assume that water flows over the walls, that water flows in our toilets, that we have access to running taps. But it's not a foregone conclusion in a lot of places in the world. Even in California, we have communities that don't have access to running fresh water. So I think the technology is super important, and there have been so many advancements in precision agriculture, controlled environment agriculture, the ability to monitor soil health remotely via sensors, and to know when to apply water, where, and how much. I think that is incredible. It's not necessarily the case in a lot of places in the world where the advancement of technology matches sort of like the human connection to the issue.
Excellent. So I want to go back to a point, Melissa, you made earlier just about diversification as a strategy to deal with water strain. It's also part of a strategy to deal with climate change if you're dealing with different climate effects in different markets and different places where you're sourcing goods. And I would just turn to Pilar and ask, how are you thinking about long-term planning with regard to water stress? Is diversification part of that strategy? But more broadly, what is the strategy?
Yeah, I think diversification is absolutely essential, especially when you're thinking about the scale and the magnitude of the work we do in our company. But also the fact that it takes a local context approach, because we have learned over the years that what works in Brazil for a soy farmer doesn't work for a canola farmer in Australia, doesn't work for a wheat farmer in Europe, and doesn't work for a corn farmer in Nebraska. So learning about what practices work well, what technologies work well, which ones can we actually replicate and use in different geographies, but which ones we can't. And I talked about regenerative agriculture before. It is one of our flagship, I would say, sustainability programs that provide multiple benefits for farmers, whether it is increasing the resilience of the soil, reducing the use of chemicals, fertilizers, water, biodiversity, improving biodiversity, and also improving the economics of the farm. But the programs have to be specific for where the farmers are. So we have to meet farmers where they need us and not dictate what we think is going to work for them. So as a result of that, we have diversified and specialized, if you will, our regenerative agricultural programs in the US, which are different for the ones we use in Europe. Same foundational approach, same principle around sustainable agricultural practices, but very specific to the local conditions, as well as Australia and Brazil. When you think about the programs, we get a lot of feedback from farmers, and we understand that we need to adapt, we need to learn, but we need to diversify. That is the case for regenerative ag, and I would say for water the same. We use different technologies. Some of them materialize into meaningful impact, some of them do not. But having I would say, a focus, we don't go for 1,000 different investments. We are very focused in terms of what we need to do. But having a diverse portfolio of investments, I think it is key, and it's proven to be successful for Cargill and for our partners.
Maybe, Melissa, I want to pull you in to pull that thread. I mean, you brought up this idea of diversification. What are you seeing in terms of long-term or medium-term strategies to deal with these issues?
Oh gosh. Yeah, I mean, I think it comes back to knowing where your supply chain is and being able to have the data and the metrics to track it in a meaningful way. I mean, here in California, we're also seeing specific crops. I spoke earlier about the financial impact by 2050 on some of these climate hazards, but like right now, we're seeing certain vegetable and tree crops moving from the southern part of California north, closer to where Kara is, where there's water, because the water, the groundwater is insufficient and the areas are so water stressed. And so it's having a very real impact on farmers and business operations today. And I think that will only grow. So short of moving, there's a lot of innovation happening here in the state of California in terms of groundwater recharge and other innovations to help manage the water that we do have. But as we've been talking about, it's a pretty significant challenge, and not every farm can move. That has serious implications not only for the crop itself, but for the costs of the rest of the companies or the rest of the organizations within that supply chain. If you're moving crops that are necessary to feed livestock, that increases the cost to dairy farmers, to livestock farmers. There's a lot of follow-on impacts to those types of decisions. So it's a very water is so interesting because it touches each of us so fundamentally and personally, but it is also this sort of massive macro situation that we all have to deal with. So I think it's unique in the way that we can talk about it openly and freely, and it's not, people get it in a way that I think sometimes the climate conversation is a little bit hard for people because it feels maybe sometimes abstract depending on the language that you're using. I think water is very real. Maybe harder to measure, maybe harder to manage, but people get it. And I think that's really an important dimension and a positive in terms of how we can solve for it.
So let's talk a little bit about that. I mean, how do you engage consumers on this? Where are consumers? I mean, do they care? Are they interested? We can start with you, Melissa, or someone else.
From a consumer perspective, I think maybe Kara might have a better.
Sure.
Yeah, I think people are generally wanting to, think about sustainability in their purchasing, but they want to, like anything, they want it to be simplified, right? I mean, there's a lot of information out there. Yeah. So I don't think it's one factor versus another. One of the things that we've done, you want to be able to sometimes shop your values, right? So I think to your point about transparency, we've created a program called Climate Pledge Friendly. And what it does is it badges on our site. So if you're shopping online on Amazon, you can filter your shopping by Climate Pledge Friendly. So if you just want to find a product that is, there's over 800 eco labels out there, and they all have different levels of, let's just say, scientific credibility. So what we've done in that program is that we've gone in and we did the work for our customers of vetting those and looking at which ones really have a scientific basis and backing. And we started off actually with only 20. And we've grown that program over time. I think there's now over 50. It's different by some geographic differences in what product availability. But we've done a very rigorous scientific deep dive on which of those have different scientific attributes and have different sustainability attributes. All of that information is available if you want to click in and know which, product has which certification, and these are all third-party certifications. You can go as deep as you want or really as high level as you want. So if you just want to know, I just want to find some products that have a sustainability certification in different ways, you can do that. If you want to go in and say, these are the things that matter to me, these are the specific sustainability attributes that matter to me, you can go in and find that. But I think when you're thinking about shopping your values, like we've tried to make that as easy as possible, but then as transparent as possible for the people who really care and want to get underneath it and say, water matters to me and I want to look for that kind of aspect, or, I want to think about, labor practices, or I want to think about carbon reducing, or I want to think about energy savings. Like those kinds of things are available to you. So I think people are looking for that, but we want to make it very easy for them. And so we've done programs like that to make it easy for people to find those products when they want to. So I think there is a level of seeking that out. And we know that to be true because we have a lot of data around when a product gets a Climate Pledge friendly certification and they do that, we see a 12% lift in GMS. So.
Can I make a comment as well? From a consumer perspective, I would say water is one of those elements that we take for granted up until when we don't have it anymore. Just like air, we don't think about it because over here in LA, we have access to clean air for the most part. But we don't really think about it unless we have limitations in accessing water. And I think the consumer of today, we get those insights from our customers, whether it is food manufacturing companies, food service companies, and retailers. Consumers are very focused on two elements. One is the carbon footprint, understanding how many emissions we're required in the process of manufacturing a beef patty or fish or poultry, you name it, as well as the human rights aspect, which I think it is fantastic. Are we treating people in our value chain and operations with dignity and respect? Are there any violations of our supply chain? And we are fully committed to eliminating those. I think water is becoming more and more relevant, and it will continue to be more relevant going forward. I think with access to data, clean label, access to information about places where there's water scarcity, it's becoming more relevant. But again, unless you see it as a problem, we don't often think about it. But I think it's great that we have companies like our 3 companies who are solely focused on that, raising awareness, but also making investments to make a difference.
I think it's very dependent where you live. If you live in Seattle, where it rains all the time, it's hard to understand really the water access. Whereas if you live in Arizona, where you're water constrained and water restricted, and you understand it, it has a very different meaning if you live in India versus I think it is very, very regional. And to your point, it's very personal. And different people, will come up to me. We have a global company. We have 1.6 million employees. We hear from those employees, and I hear from people's personal stories all the time where they say, I grew up, without access to water. Or people will say, I don't understand why this is an issue. Right. So I do think it's a very personal issue. And it is very dependent on where you are in the world.
Yeah, very. As we said at the beginning, I think Pilar said in the beginning, it's local. It's all local. So, I have a few audience questions I want to get to, but I just want to sort of go to you, Melissa, with a sort of final question, just about what you're seeing in your survey data from businesses on climate issues at the moment. Not just water, but climate issues at the moment. Obviously water is extremely pressing from a material perspective at the moment, but what is the bigger picture?
Sure, thanks, Justin. Just yesterday, we announced the results of our 3rd business leaders survey, where we surveyed 700 business leaders across North America, really to uncover attitudes, trends, challenges that they're seeing with regard to climate action in particular. When I say climate action, I'm talking about, and we're talking about impacts related to, navigating the impacts of extreme weather, customer preferences, et cetera, et cetera. And what my big takeaway from the survey data was, I think this is so interesting because it's a trend that we've seen over the last couple of times that we've done this survey. Business leaders are increasingly seeing the need to take action, which is encouraging. But not only that, they are so they're seeing the need to take action. But the reason that they're taking action, actually, it used to be more prevalent that they were taking action because it was good for the environment. And what we're seeing is that response is actually trending down, and businesses are taking action because they're seeing that it's an imperative from their customers and their investors. And when we ask them, what does taking action mean to you, it's a wide variety of things. It could be, switching to electric vehicles, or reducing non-essential travel, or measuring and disclosing greenhouse gas emissions. It's a whole host of things that also have benefits to water as well. So I thought that was interesting. Sort of the reasons for taking action are changing. And I think also encouragingly, business leaders are seeing that the actions they're taking are actually having an impact. They have increased confidence that they're on the right track, that they're developing the right plans, they have plans in place, and that they're taking actions that are meaningful to their business, and perhaps also very importantly, meaningful to their customers and their investors as well.
That's great. Okay. Just a couple audience questions here. One is just a follow-up for Kara, just an audience member who was intrigued by the net positive and just wanted to hear some more details of what that looks like. Is it new sources of water, desalination, just a little more texture there?
Sure. We have 27 water replenishment projects all over the world, and those are going to return more than, I think it's 8 billion gallons of water when they get going annually per year. So those are a variety of projects, and they include things like groundwater recharge and investments in sort of, wetlands and wash projects. And so it's a whole variety of different things. There's a ton of detail, just in the interest of time. We've detailed all of this on our website, so you can dive in deep and read all about it. But a lot of different projects at a very big scale around the world.
So another question here about ownership of water. Is that a concern? Are any of your companies making physical investments or policy advocacy related to ownership of water? And I also would love to just get, I don't know if Melissa has a sort of overview look, across sectors. If not, that's okay, but figured I'd offer that too.
On the ownership question in particular, I mean, I think definitely an issue. I don't know that I have a perspective on what the suite of solutions might be, but definitely an issue. Certainly, I mean, here in California, we see this in terms of the water here where we're sitting right now comes from Northern California. And just again, back to the intersection between energy and water, the state water project is the largest consumer of electricity in the state. The pumps that you can see, if you drive along the Grapevine, you can see the pumps that bring water from the north to the south. That's a big deal. California is a huge state. It would be a real significant challenge if you were dealing with, maybe different state municipality type issues, which we do see in other parts of the world.
Pilar, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, in terms of ownership, I would say indirectly because of the work we do with our farmers, with our customers and communities. So for sure, we are making investments, as I mentioned before, to restore water, to reduce the use of water. And as it relates to policies, I would say open trade for us, for sure, supporting agricultural producers is key, and supporting policies that allow farmers to get access to water, which in many countries of the world, that policy doesn't exist. So we advocate, we work closely with governments and the local communities to make sure that access to water is available for communities in need.
So there's one more question here that I'd love to pose. I don't know, just about how to price water, right? And obviously, as we've alluded to, people take water for granted. And so, is there a good policy mechanism to price water, or just perhaps even, more softly a way to get people to better understand the value of water?
I'm happy to jump in. I didn't realize this. I was having a conversation with someone today or earlier this week about water, and she lives in New York and said, we don't pay for water. That's not something that's like even on our radar. I could brush my teeth with the tap on all day long if I wanted, which is, I grew up in California. As a Californian, that is like horrifying. I've got friends in the Midwest, similar. There's certainly like a very utilitarian function of pricing water. But I would come back to also just the interconnection with energy. Sometimes you can sort of treat reduction of greenhouse gas emissions and energy consumption as a bit of a proxy for water, because in many parts of the world, water is significantly underpriced for how valuable it is. But if you're, as Pilar mentioned, I mean, if you're focusing on some of these interventions, they have a whole host of benefits that can improve the water situation as well.
Well, we're out of time, but this has been a great discussion. My takeaways: one, the material risk. This is a real risk, and then there are opportunities to work, especially in communities, realizing those co-benefits, innovations that come from technology to help reach local communities that maybe might have been hard to reach on these issues before. Thank you to this panel for such a great, thoughtful discussion.
Thank you.